Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Howard Greenberg, and welcome to our October OpenNTF webinar. Today, we're going to talk about some of the features that I guess pretty much our board members, Serdar and Roberto, have been working with and like. And so first, let's go through some upfront material. My co-host today is Graham Akers, another board member of OpenNTF. Hi, Graham.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody.
And also we have Jesse Gallagher from the board, who is assisting us today. Hi, Jesse. I think you're on mute, but that's okay. Today, as I mentioned, we got 3 of the Domino 12 features that we're going to go through. The first one is two-factor authentication. That's in Domino 12. Also called time-based one-time authentication. That's the method of two-factor that's implemented. Roberto will take us through that. Then Serdar is going to talk about what's called DOTS, Domino OSGI Tasklets. And then Roberto will come back and talk about one-touch setup. And then we'll have Q&A. And I think what we'll do is probably hold the questions for everyone till the end. Put your questions in as you get them, and we'll talk about that in a second. So everyone's going to say, is this going to be recorded? So don't ask that question. Yes, it's going to be recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. You can also access links to each recording from our openntf.org/webinars page. So when you ask a question, use the questions pane in the GoToWebinar interface. And as I said, we'll hold all the questions to the end, and we'll respond to your questions verbally. So if we don't respond to your questions in the questions pane, don't be alarmed. We will get to them at the end. We do it that way so the questions and answers can be recorded on the YouTube part. Otherwise, they kind of go off and they're kind of off by themselves, and you can't really, have the video and the questions together. So if you have any unrelated questions, post them at our Slack channel, openntf.slack.com. And so please keep your questions related to what Roberto and Serdar are talking about. I'd like to, every month we are very grateful to HCL and Prominic. HCL has supported our organization and made a nice financial contribution, which funds webinars. And we also, in OpenNTF, will help out other user groups. Like we've just sponsored CollabSphere that's coming up, sponsor Engage and other user events like that. So also, Prominic provides basically all the infrastructure for running OpenNTF, as well as manpower to do the administration. So thank you to both companies. We are a volunteer organization, so please, if you have some time or want to get involved, just reach out to one of us. And there's a lot of little projects that can be done, depending on how involved you want to get. Or if you have any projects you want to contribute, of course, please reach out to us. We'll tell you how you can do that. Our next webinar, we're still working on. We got some good ideas. We'll post that information at our link, as well as send out emails. Upcoming events, I mentioned CollabSphere, and that is coming up next week. So you can sign up. Registration is open. The schedule has been posted. There's a lot of great speakers. I know Graham and Jesse are speaking on different topics. We also have OpenNTF Roundtable in that event. I forget exactly what time it is, but you'll see that on the schedule. And Theo, of course, is organizing Engage. This will be an in-person event in Bruges. I mentioned this last month. I even reached into my archive and pulled out a couple pictures of Bruges. And as you can see, it's a beautiful town. So if you can make it, please try to go. And so I think that brings us up to time for Roberto. So I'm going to make you the presenter.
Thank you. Show my screen. Let me see.
Yep, we see your PowerPoint. Yep, you're good, Roberto.
Thanks. There is another OpenNTF director that is speaking at Columnsphere, me. You forgot me, Howard. Okay,
Sorry about
seriously,
that, Roberto.
no problem.
I haven't went through the entire schedule. I just picked out a few like developer stuff that I was looking for.
I was joking. So let's talk about setting up the time-based one-time password on a Domino server. First of all, a definition for those who are not familiar with these ideas and terms. What is MFA, multi-factor authentication? That includes obviously the two-factor authentication. It's a method of authentication in which a user, to get access to a website or an application, presents two or more pieces or evidence called factors. Knowledge, something that the user knows, like a password, a PIN. Possession, something that only the user has, and it's typically an authenticator, a Google Authenticator, stuff like that, that you have on your phone, or a token generator like the one that the banks used until a few years ago. And inherence, something that the user is. I mean, a physical characteristic like a fingerprint, the eye scanner, and stuff like that. So these are the pieces of multi-factor authentication. The TOTP is one of those methods that it's used in Domino. So we use a two-factor authentication, and TLTP, as Howard said, is time-based one-time password, which means that when you log on to a Domino web server, you can require that the user, other than the password, provide a token, which is time-based. By default, it's, I guess, 30 minutes, whatever, but you can configure it in when you set up the OTP. So the user, upon the login request, has to type the password and give the code using an authenticator. So the requirements are a V12 Domino server. As Howard said, this is new in V12. Natively, it doesn't work with the other Domino versions. To be honest, there is a business partner, a Russian one, that has built a two-factor authentication application for Domino that works on previous versions. But if you want to use the native one, you got to be at V12. Another requirement is a Vault database. You have to use the Vault, upgraded to the V12 ID Vault design. So if you have upgraded the server, for example, from V11 to V12, you have to update the design of the Vault, otherwise it's not going to work. And then the users must have a TOTP application, which again, typically it's nowadays on smartphone. It can be a Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Authy, Duo Mobile. There is specification, the RFC 6238. So in theory, any TOTP application compliant with this RFC can be used to do the login to the Domino server. The setup, it's pretty easy. It's just 6 steps, as you see. So first of all, you need to issue a Vault Trust certificate for TOTP. Enable TOTP authentication in the configuration settings document. Enable TOTP authentication on servers, and there are 3 different ways to do that. Optional, you can enable secure mail operation for TOTP that allows users to do something more like signing, encrypting, and these kind of things. you have to configure the TOTP login form and then restart the Vault server to enable TLTP. We'll go through those steps one by one. So, issue a Vault Trust certificate for TOTP. At the server console, you issue this command, mfa mgmt create trust cert. Then the organization that you want to allow the authentication for, you give the certifier ID file and a password. So there is, in the second line, there is an example of the command that you have to type. Once you do that, the certificate is issued for default, and you can check. If you open the Domino directory, select the certificate view, you should see a multi-factor authentication certificate, which is the one that you have just created. Another way to test is to issue the show ID vault command on the server console, and in the output there is a line like this, /renovation trust/renovations for MFA. Okay, so if you see these, it means that the certificate, the first step, has been done correctly. Then you either create, if you don't have, or edit if you already have, a configuration setting document. Click on the security tab and fill in the field for multi-factor authentication, like time-based, enable, allow emergency scratch code. Scratch code is something that upon registration, I will show you what happens when a user sets up the multi-factor authentication on the Domino server. It will get a list of emergency codes that can be used in case he has lost the authenticator, or lost the phone, whatever. So you can use those only once, are by default the number of secrets you define, 2, 3, 10, I guess it's the maximum. And they can use it to allow login even in case they forgot the device. They are called emergency scratch codes. You can email to a user, otherwise a pop-up will show on the screen and you have to save, write it down somewhere. You can select the algorithm and the internet password verification. So you fill in these fields in the configuration settings. Enable the TOTP authentication in the configuration settings document. The algorithm used to generate the token, if you use the default, is HMAC SHA-256. Unless you find that there are other TOTP applications that you have in your environment that don't support it. So the ID Vault supports downgrading one level, so from SHA-256 to SHA-1. Okay, so HCL has kept the default algorithm as SHA-256 to support the more recent TOTP clients like Google Authenticator, Authy, and Microsoft Authenticator. Those authenticators, Authy and Microsoft, also support the SH1. So you can use them if you already have them in your organization because you have another application that uses TOTP and accept only the SH1 standard. So one level you can downgrade, but by default, select SHA-256. Then you have to enable the TOTP authentication on servers. As I said, there are 3 ways to do it and depends on your configuration. You can enable it through a server document. If you use internet site, you can enable through a website document, and if you use virtual servers, you can enable through a virtual server document. I will not go through all the details of all the cases. I'll just use the example of the server document. So you just open the server document, select Internet Protocols Domino Web Engine. In the session authentication, you have to select single server or multiple server. There's a note you see at the bottom of the slide. TOTP is not supported either with basic authentication and SAML. So if you have SAML or basic authentication, you cannot use TOTP. That's why you have to select single server or multiple server. And there's a section, Domino Access Service. You select Enable Service TOTP. This is if you use a server document. It's similar if you use the website or the virtual server document. To enable TOTP on the servers, you have to go into the ports, internet ports, and in the web session authentication, name and password, which by default is yes, you select yes with TOTP. Okay. As I said, you can support more secure operation like encryption, decryption, signing for people that access from the web but have an Auth ID. Remember that we have to use a vault, so they have an Auth ID. By the way, when you enable this feature, the ability for iNodes users to upload and download the ID to and from the vault is disabled. And these are the steps that you have to do to enable secure operation. Again, this is optional. It's not mandatory. It's just if you want to configure more secure operation. So open the security setting document, click on the Default tab. In the sections TLTP-based ID download, select yes in the Allow TOTP authentication. And to allow web users that do not use TOTP to continue to download their Nodes ID, select yes in the Allow Password authentication. If you select no, you will force basically all the users to use TOTP. So you can have this mixed situation. Some users have TOTP, some others have not, but if your plan is to use it massively, once everybody is on TOTP, you can select no in that field and do not allow people to download their IDs. Then open the Vault database, the configuration document. In the TOTP authenticated Vault login, specify all the Domino webmail server in the trusted server field. Now, and we go back to the mandatory steps, you have to configure the TOTP login form. Either open if you have one or create a new one, the web server configuration database. Note, the name of the database must be domcfg.nsf. I know that's the default and everybody uses that name, but just in case that someone has used another name for the Domino web server config, well, no. You better create a new one and call it domcfg.nsf. It's mandatory as of now. Open the sign in for mappings, click Add a mapping, and under the site information, choose either all website or specific website virtual server, depending on where you want to give access to your users. And under form mapping, for target database, specify domcfg.nsf. And for the target form, you have to use this new form, $login user form MFA. It's new in V12 and it's used by the TOTP application. Make sure that the default entry in the HCL has reader access. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Restart the Domino server. This is step 6. And that's all. It's pretty easy. It's well documented in the official documentation, so it's not a very big problem to set it up. Now I have a demo for you. So let me see if you can see my screen. We have a Domino server. Hold on. I have it running already. It's a released web server. I have set up TOTP already, and I'm going to show you how it works. I don't have my phone, sorry, I opened the wrong business. I don't have an authentication here, but for testing purposes, there is an extension, a Chrome extension that does the authentication. So if I just open my server names and stuff, now I have to type my name. I have to type my password. And then it requires the MFA token. So now if I click on Authenticator, I get this one, copy, paste, and I am in. Okay. Because I had already set up the multi-factor authentication for myself as a user. Now I'm going to try with another user. So I'm going to log in and just use another name. Now, this is the first time this user tries to access the server, so he has to do this, set up multi-factor authentication. You have to create an account, a name for the account, and then you have to use this in the Authenticator application. So I will do this, and I will just grab the QR code. Okay. Now I will do the testing for this one. Paste. Validate. These are the scratch codes I was mentioning before. It's written, sorry, it's in Italian, but it says that those temporary tokens can be used only once for the multi-factor authentication if your authenticator is not available. So you have to copy those somewhere, copy and paste a note, but do whatever you want, and then you click, okay, I copied it. Next. So now it's configured. If I log in again now, token, I am Fabio. Paste it here, and then I am. So this is how it works. It's very simple, and it's not very hard to set up, as you've seen in 5 steps, plus one optional. So that's it, and you have set up the multi-factor two-factor authentication in Domino using the TOTP. Howard, back to you.
All right, thanks, Roberto.
I'll make you presenter.
Okay, and I'm going to make Serdar and make you the presenter. You're up next.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So you should have the presenter rights.
coming. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, no. Did you shared it?
I shared it, and sorry about that.
No problem.
Sometimes after upgrade, it seems like it forgets something. How about now?
Not yet,
Not yet?
no. You should have in the GoToWebinar interface, show screen, and then you can pick if you want to.
Yeah, I picked that. How about now?
Not yet. Tell you what, let me switch to my computer and switch back to you, and then it might have a prompt that will tell you what
that's
to
a
do.
good idea.
Okay, I'm going to switch back to you, Serdar.
I need to get out and get back in, I guess. Probably it's has some issue with the security.
Okay, well, tell you what,
If
Roberto, do you want to start?
exactly.
Yeah, why don't you
Roberto,
start on your second one?
I'll do the one-touch setup, and then I'll.
Yeah,
okay.
and then we'll come back to you, Serdar.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Make me presenter, please. Show my screen. Show screen.
Yep, we see that.
2. You see that. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. One-touch setup. One-touch setup is a killer feature, my personal opinion, in Domino V12. That's why when we discussed about the webinar topics, what are the more nice features in V12 that we love, I selected TOTP because it's a very nice security feature, what was really needed, and one-touch setup. This, and I'm speaking as an admin, but it can also be good for developers, is really, really a killer feature. It lets you set up a Domino server in seconds. You don't have to go through the usual screens. It's something that you will see. It's definitely something that I recommend you to test. So, as I said, in previous version, you have to set up a Domino server going through multiple steps. Now, in Domino 12, you can use the one-touch setup. You just issue one command and you set up a server, period. It works using either a JSON file or a set of environment variables. And those files contain the setup configuration information. You can set up servers, set up EB vaults, create and update application and documents, and enable and run agent. The most advanced feature are available only through the JSON file. If you use the environment variables, the options are more limited. So for a quick and dirty setup, you have to create a server for testing. My suggestion is to use environment variables. Just put, you will see now, I'll show you an example. The minimum information needed, you have a server up and running. If you want to do something more sophisticated, And in 12.01, it's going to get even more sophisticated, like setting up the new certification manager with the micro CA already configured. I mean, it can go really deep. You have to use the JSON file. One-touch setup can be used when you install Domino on Windows, Unix, Linux, and Docker. So for all three platforms is supported. Now, the environment variables. As I said, it's the easiest way to set up a server, though it's limited compared to the JSON file. So in Windows, either Windows and Linux, you run a batch file or a shell script, I pointed here, to export the system variables needed. And those that I listed in the slides are the minimum, just 12 lines or something like that. First, or additional server, in this case first, a name, domain name, server title, the host name, organization name, certified password, admin, name, ID file, and password. That's the basis that you need to create a Domino server. Then, okay, you can do more, but as a minimum, you just need this. For Docker, you define the variables in a text file, and then you refer to this file when you run the command to set it up. The environment variables, the list is pretty long, so I didn't want to put you through 3 or 4 slides of stuff, and just put a link to the official documentation where there is the list of all the environment variables that you can use. As I said in the previous slide, the example was the bare minimum, but there is more that you can do, even with environment variables that's less than the JSON file, but there's more than just name, admin, and that's it. Just a note for those not familiar with this platform, if you use the system environment variables on Unix, you have to make sure that the variable names are in uppercase. In Windows, you can ignore it, but as the people familiar with Linux knows, Unix is case sensitive, so it must be in uppercase, the variable names. And if you export the system variable that has a space, for example, Acme application server, you have to put the quotes. So, for example, specify server setup, server title, quotes, Acme application server, because without quotes it will not work. JSON file allows to do more than environment variables. Create application and documents, enable run agents, creation of ID vault. Again, the list is available here. It's in documentation. Let me see if I can, if it works, if I click it. No. See, control click. No. I wanted to show you, but okay, here it is. I'll show you here. These are all the variables that you can see. Server setup, type, first or additional, either one. Name, domain name, title, password, minimum password length, user existing server ID, ID file path, the server task, the additional server task, all the part of the network, all the part relevant for the organization, use an existing certifier, otherwise create a new one. Admin, first name, last name, nodes INI, settings, HCL, parameters to register additional servers. If in an existing server, the common name, the host name or IP, all the parameters for the ID vault, all the parameters for application configuration. You see that it's quite a very long and thorough list. All the JSON parameters for the one-touch setup error preference server. So this is what you will find if you follow the link. In the official documentation, HCL has tried to help, and there are some examples of a minimal JSON file for the first server setup, which is something like what you saw before, just a dozen lines or something like that. There is a minimal JSON file for an additional server setup. There is a full JSON file for both first and additional server setup, and a JSON file for server setup with the default and application configuration. Otherwise, my suggestion is, other than those examples, head over to the GitHub repository for Domino on Docker, the one created and managed by Daniel Nasher, the lifetime HCL ambassador that I guess every one of you knows, and Thomas Hampel from HCL. You know that there is this repository on GitHub where they have all the stuff needed to run Domino on Docker, in general Domino on Linux. Here, following the link that I put in the slide, there is a great example of a full server setup JSON file created by Daniel that you can grab and use as a reference and then modify according to your needs. Speaking of modify, it's a JSON file, so be very careful when editing. If you ever tried to create a JSON file, you know what I mean. Spaces, tabs, and you have to be very careful. It's not just a text file, it's a JSON file. So then, once you have your files ready, you can invoke the setup on Windows or Linux in two different ways. If you have environment variables, well, you have to install Domino, run the shell script or batch file that I put up in the previous slide to export the variables, and then run HCL Dom and server minus -autoconf or OPT-HCL Domino to startup server -autoconf. So these are exactly the comments that you have to type. If you do with JSON file, again, you install Domino and run the server with the autoconf option specifying the JSON file. Okay, that's it. That's the way you do it. There is another option. Again, it's not in the official documentation, but it's a very good option in my opinion. Again, if you go on GitHub, and I strongly suggest you to go and clone the GitHub repository so you get all the updates made by Daniel. You use his scripts to install Domino and do the setup. So, and this is what I will show you in a minute. If you do install _domino sh, you run this command, you install Domino. Then you type Domino setup to invoke the one-touch setup. And then simply you type Domino start and start the server. In the repository on GitHub, there are 4 files, even here: environment first server, environment additional server, JSON first server, JSON additional server. So you either run the command Domino setup env1, they're called env1, env2, JSON1, JSON2 by default. So if you want to use JSON to set up an additional server, you run Domino setup JSON2, and it will create everything according to what you have set in the configuration file. On Docker, it's slightly different. So you need to create a volume to store the data directory, typically called nodes data. So you run the Docker command, Docker volume create nodes data. And then you run this command that I put it here below. I'm not going to read it. That create your container and invoke the one-touch Domino setup and run the server. Okay, you see --m file, for example, local nodes data and txt. This is what I was referring before when I said you write the variables in a text file that is referenced here. So this is the command if you run the environment variables. If you use the JSON file, there are two steps. Again, create the volume, run this command, docker run -it, blah, blah, blah. And this creates Docker container without configuring Domino, but make the container entry point a shell. When you run this command, and I will, if we have time, I will show you, you will find yourself inside the container in the local nodes data directory. And this command also export all the variables needed to enable the one-touch setup. So you run this command, then from another terminal, you copy your JSON file from your local host into the container, like docker cp /root/ setup.json in container number, comma, /local/nodes data file. And after you've done that, you run from inside the container. Remember that when you run the first command, I told you we are in the container in the nodes data directory. So you run /local/start. And that invoke the JSON file and will create the server. So it's slightly different if you do it on Docker. Again, you can also, in the Docker case, use the Daniel script, but I wanted to point out what is the official documentation, what's said in the official documentation. So again, it's demo time, and let me bring up my machine. As you can see, we have a CentOS server where I am, and hold on a second, I need to, oops, bring up my instructions so I can copy and paste it, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so I'm going to do it. This is a standard Linux. I'm going to do it using the scripts from Daniel, from the GitHub repository, which is way easier to do that. So, where am I? Okay, should be good. By the way, I've cloned the Tasklet. What's it up? I have cloned the repository. So if you go here, you will see that there are the files that I was telling you before. the first server JSON, first server.env, additional server JSON, and additional server.env. Okay. So let me see. From here, I will install Domino. Obviously, in order to do that, there are some steps you have to do before, like downloading the kit, putting in a specific directory. But if you go on the repository, there is all the instructions. By the way, it's nice. It tells you that the operating system CentOS 8 has not been tested by HCL. As you know, it's not an officially supported platform. I should have run CentOS 7 or Red Hat, but it works the same. Anyway, it's nice that it alerts you. Just a few seconds and it will install the Domino server. It's working. Just a few more minutes and we'll be running. Okay, now I have installed Domino, and as you can see, I have directory opt HCL with everything installed. Now I will install the latest script from Daniel. Okay, and I will do Domino setup, for example, one.
Typo. Domino.
Oh, sorry. I can't remember if there's a, nope. Okay, so this is the file that I'm gonna use. So I will create a server called my Domino server with John Doe as an admin. Okay, so now if I do Domino setup, oh, I will tell him Domino start. And now if I open the console, you see I have a server running and it's called my Domino server Acme, all the stuff that I wrote down in the JSON or environment variables file. And that's all. So you can see that when I said that it can be useful also for hardcore developers, it means that you don't have to spend many time to set up a test server. I've done it in what was 5 minutes, and you can have your test server up and running and that's it. And then you can start developing what you need. So you don't have to bug your company administrators. Can you create me a server? Just simple as that. Okay, now this is the standard way to do it. I'm using Linux, but as I wrote in the slides, is basically the same procedure in Windows, though you don't have the advantage of using the script, the internal scripts of Windows. Now let me get rid of this Domino server completely. And I'm gonna, do I have some time? Yeah, maybe 5 minutes I can try. I'm gonna show you how it works on Docker. So as I said, there are a few commands you have to type. So I will create a volume and I will run that command that I put in the slide before. What's wrong? Oh, do I already have one? Maybe there's a typo. Let me see. Oops, sorry, that's simply live table effect. Oh yeah, I needed to remove it. Sorry, I created it before. Okay. So we run again, please. Again. Believe it or not, I have tried it 5 times this morning preparing for the webinar intro. Now it's not working. Address already in use. It's strange. Let me give it a try another time. Last time. Okay. Oh, I've got Notes Domino running. That's the problem. And that's why.
Hey, Roberto, if you can maybe wrap it up in about 3 minutes so we get Serdar solved his issues and we're ready to go. So we think we have a backup plan.
Yeah, okay. The problem is that I have the Domino server on the host running and it's taking port 1352. So that's why when I try to run this command and I told him to map port 1352 to 1352, it's not going to work because the port is already taken. Sorry, I had to shut down the Domino host server before running it on Docker. Anyway, basically, you run this command, then as I said, you copy your JSON file, you run /local/start, and that's it. You will have your server running on Docker in a minute. So it's very easy to set up. It doesn't require any special skills, and test server, development server, you can create as many as you want in a very short time. That's all. Thanks, Howard. And on to Serdar. I guess I have to make you the presenter again.
I got it. Yeah, I'll take care of it. All right, Serdar, we'll try again. If not, oops, I'm the presenter. Serdar?
Yes, I'm here.
You want sharing your screen first? You want to just go to the PDF?
I shared the screen now.
Okay, hold on. Somehow I got made the presenter. Let me
Okay.
go back. Okay, try that.
How about now?
No, nothing. You
No,
want to go to
nothing.
go to PDF or PDF backup?
Let's see. I will share the main screen now. What about now? No.
No.
Okay, back to PDF then.
We'll go to PDF. So let me present. Okay, are you seeing your PDF file?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can go full screen here.
I will do my arrangements. Okay, can you, yeah, we can, I guess, start.
Okay. You see your title screen, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And hello, everyone. And this is Serdar presenting from London. And sorry about the delay. I guess macOS upgrade clashed with GoToWebinar settings. So anyway, in this section of today's webinar, I'd like to provide a short overview over DOTS feature. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time for a deep dive and talk about everything. And we can, I guess, focus on some practical implication of DOTS feature. So in the screen, you can see the slide from Connect 2013. So this was my first session ever in Lotusphere or in any international conference. But our journey started just a year before that in 2012. And I was mostly working on Xpages and Java, like the most of the community. And we had a missing part in the development environment at that time, if you remember. We didn't have an exact agent counterpart for the Xpage paradigm. And Domino agents were old and buggy, just as today back then. And they were quite disconnected from the Xpages habits, let's say. And we were talking to IBMers about this. And one in the 2012, they told me about there's something I could use, and it was already on OpenNTF, and it was being actively used by Lotus Live backend at the time. If you remember what Lotus Live is, it's a anyway, it's a geek alert. That was how I got into DOTS almost a decade ago. So we can proceed to the next slide now. So what is DOTS? Domino OSGI Tasklet services allows us to develop and run lightweight tasks, or also now known as tasklets, on our Domino servers. We can initiate those tasklets manually or based on a schedule, or even through API level data events, which are called hooks on Domino servers. These are API level events like new document creation or deletion or similar data events. Next slide, please. And as I said, the project has started on OpenNTF. It was known as in a different name, but until Domino 9, it was something to be installed manually, downloaded and installed manually. And version 9 introduced OpenSocial add-on, and that's what's part of this add-on in the Domino 9. However, it was a disappointment at the time because IBM took DOTS out of support in Domino 9 because they were using DOTS for a very specific purpose in inodes, specifically inodes with integrating to open social container. And eventually that part become obsolete, and Domino 10 removed OpenSocial add-on and dots from the product in 3 years ago. Next slide, please. Now, 3 years later, HCL listened to the community, and they have added dots back into the core product. And currently, it's supported on Windows and Linux platforms, and the OSGI in the backend has been upgraded to 4.6.2, which is Neon 2 level. Next slide, please. So enough history, and let's take a closer look into dots. So basically, dots uses a server task to coordinate its tasklets or define tasklets. These tasklets run in a separate JVM from the agent, separate from the agent manager or the HTTP itself. This provides the ability for us to tweak its memory and performance settings separately from our existing applications. Dots also supports multiple profile. This is a powerful feature because each profile creates a virtual container in the server with separate service threads. Because tasklets in different profiles run in different threads, they cannot block other containers, so the environment can scale up with multiple virtual containers. Next slide, please. So the crucial question is this: what is it good for? That fills in a very important gap in our development paradigm. When you need an unattended, long-running background process accessing Domino resources, that is a great alternative with its scalability and high performance. And I can hear those asking that we already have agents, and I would make a case against that in a slide or so. But key concepts here is compatibility, scalability, and performance. Next slide, please. Of course, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And dots development is an expensive process for really simple tasks. And there is a steep learning curve, especially for those without necessary experience with Java, OSGI, Eclipse, plugin development, and deployment, etc. Also, there is some form, if there is some form of user interaction involved, I mean, dots may not be the perfect solution for that case. Dots is great for something running and working hard in the backend, and unfortunately, the ordinary users are not part of its process. Next slide, please. And we've mentioned about agents, and in fact, agents are the best approach to solving the unattended tasks problem. They are easy to develop, easy to maintain and deploy without administrator involvement, and it's a huge thing in Domino. And you can develop agents right inside the Domino designer, and they have a solid security, especially from code signing perspective. And most important one, once you develop an agent, you can run it on the server and on the client as well. But on the other hand, they are not quite perfect. Next slide, please. And next. And previously, I had this simple experiment with a long-running job on a test agent, and the performance difference was extraordinary. It's as you can see, it's 143 seconds versus 41 seconds in dots. The reason is obvious and simple, because when there is a Java agent needs to run, agent manager creates a entire new thread and set up a new JVM instance, and its native interfaces are set up, and it loads the Java bytecode from the scratch. And if there is jar files involved or other Java libraries involved, they all needs to be loaded in the memory, and it finally runs the agents, and this process takes a huge time. And in contrast, thanks to the OSGI platform and its separate JVM always loaded, DOTS tasklets are preloaded into memory, and everything is ready to run anytime, and it just runs the code. And in some cases, it even persists the same objects in the same memory heap, so we can use persistence between multiple runs. It can benefit all kinds of stuff like caching or persistence, etc. Next slide, please. And there are more problems with Java agents. Java agents were added to Domino more than 2 decades ago, and it never saw a significant update since then. And that's why they are a little incompatible to the modern Java world. There are some components like class loader, its security manager, etc. These are preventing some modern Java libraries from running inside the agents, or best case, they run very ineffectively. And there are also buggy behaviors. For instance, this chronic memory leak issues when you are using a large number of jar files on your server. It leads to crashing at the end. And Java agents may not be scalable on some cases, because especially if you need long-running tasks needed to be run on the server, you need to pay attention to other agents as well, because they can block other agents when they run. Next slide, please. We should also mention ZOTs at this point as a feasible alternative to ZOTs, ZOTs, yeah. And ZOTs is, as Paul said before, DOTS tasklet within X pages. It seems like a perfect solution because it's part of OpenNTF Domino API. It allows us to run background tasks. But one problem in DOTS, as I said before, is that it plays in a different context, in a different field than X pages. It means that normally we can't reuse the same code base or same Java classes or even the same scope between X pages and DOTS. They are completely independent from each other. ZOTs eliminates this problem because it runs within the X pages engine, and it also uses ordinary Java classes inside Designer. They can access scope elements, and they can, of course, use all kinds of ODA functionalities like logging and auto-recycling, etc. Of course, there is no reason why ODA doesn't run with DOTS. It just there are not much cases to be tested against. The most important reminder, of course, for DOTS, and in general ODA, it's a community effort. So they need more contributors, more users to test, and even though ODA team is very keen to support our problem reports on Slack, as OpenNTF, we are lack of contribution right now. Next slide, please. Before we finish, let's take a look at a couple of real-world cases where DOTS makes a lot of sense to use. One of them is the former Feedmaster project of OpenNTF Collaboration Today site. Next slide, please. So if you are familiar with the Collaboration Today site, which I'd really appreciate it if you are familiar with it, it's a website where you can see a curated content of latest news and blog posts around our space. So volunteer curators add new stories daily, and normally this process is completely manual. And manually adding a new story to the site is a bit tedious. I mean, you need to be aware of what's going on in the community. And in today's world, nobody reads blog every day. And important stories manually is alone time consuming because you have to adjust title, summary, etc. So to publish them. Feedmonster at the end was developed to help creators to save some time. Next slide, please. The architecture is simple. There's a dots module. We are defining the feed URLs. It's maintaining an internal queue of feeds, and it's manually fetching or scheduled fetching new stories from blogs. So we monitor established blogs from community, and draft stories therefore are ready for curators to be published. This saves a lot of time. Sometimes we need to manually overwrite the process. I mean, pick some address, fetch some new block manually, etc. And thanks to dots, we can use console commands, Domino console commands, to do that kind of manual operations. Next slide, please. Another example project is from one of my own customers. Next slide, please. And in this case, my customer was using Domino for their CRM, sales, and marketing automation. And all was working on Notes clients, working on Domino environments. And they were also using email marketing frequently for special campaign, and they were sending weekly newsletters for different customer groups. Of course, at some point in time, too many regulations on sending emails. So this function from sending emails from Domino becomes a huge burden and huge problem. They decided to use a third-party service for email marketing. However, we didn't want the third party to persist any customer record. And so all uploads was going to be transient in the operation. If you send a newsletter to 1,000 customers, you should prepare a CSV file with 1,000 customers and upload it, set up the mailing, and after the emailing, CSV file will be deleted in the remote party by the remote party. And next time you need that particular newsletter to be sent again, you have to upload it again. And in the same way, we can't hand over the CSV file to the employee. Files should only be prepared by the server itself, and they should be uploaded to a secure place. Nobody should be able to see those users and those client information. Next slide, please. And we evaluated at the time the problem, and we decided to take the dots paths in this project. The project was simple, but the problem is we had already reusable Java libraries from previous projects, and we just repurposed those libraries and developed simple queuing algorithm and then upload Tasklet. So because this process takes a lot of time, scalability was important for us. For instance, some target queries contain multi-database DB search process, and Tasklets are quite efficient to handle that kind of load in local. And at the same time, the process was completely isolated from ordinary users, which is an important feature for security. And this project worked well until the customer took the CRM out of Domino. That's a sad story, in fact. Anyway, next slide, please. And to start today, to develop dots with new Domino 12. Just a couple of notes, final notes. Next slide, please. If you are already using DOTS on your server, or you have already ongoing or running system from previous versions, you need to be careful about a couple of details. For instance, you need to update your Eclipse and recompile all plugins with some changed package names. And you need, when you upgrade to Domino V12, it removes existing DOTS plugins thanks to URI. This is an important warning. It resets everything, so be careful about that. Next slide, please. If you are new to this world, using DOTS for the first time, you need to have an Eclipse IDE. I added a couple of guides here for you to explain everything step by step. HCL provided the DOTS documentation with the recent version, and DOTS is the same DOTS, so the old documents, videos, or presentations are still valid for the upcoming version. And I have put my original slides from 2013. And at the same time, I have recorded the complete process in Node C9 in a Node C9 episode. And also follow this page, please, because we are planning, hopefully, we are planning a whole session dedicated to DOTS in future OpenNTF webinar series. And that's with this. I thank you for bearing with me and bearing with the problems. I hand over back to Howard now. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Serdar. Very interesting, and thanks, Roberto, for your presentations as well. So now we're ready for questions. Let's see. So a reminder, you can ask the questions in the GoToWebinar questions pane. And we have a couple of questions queued up. Graham, you got the first question?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that we like to mention at the beginning of webinars, but missed this time around, was to try and keep the questions relevant to the presentation. And we got one that was server related, but not specific to the presentation. It was just a question about how many CPU cores should be allocated to Domino, which could probably be a fairly long conversation because there's a lot of factors involved in answering that. And what we'd like to do for folks with those kinds of questions is to remind you that we do have our Slack channel, and that's on the screen there. By all means, jump over to the OpenNTF Slack. There's lots of different channels. There is one very specific to Domino admin, and that question would be very relevant there. So again, just a reminder that there's lots of activity in Slack on our OpenNTF channel, and you can go there. So going to the first question.
Sorry, Graham. I was. Did you say about DOTS channel? We have opened recently a DOTS channel in Slack chat in OpenNTF Slack workspace.
That's right. Thank you for mentioning that. We have a brand new channel added just the other day, specific to DOTS. Okay, so going back to Roberto's presentation on the multi-factor authentication, there's a question here about having a DOM config login form that has been customized, and now with the new TOTP brought in, the question is, how do we customize the login form now that we're using TOTP? And I have an answer, but I'm going to give Roberto the opportunity to answer first.
Well, my first take would be this one. I am assuming that you have taken the standard login form and customized it. Well, now if you open the designer, there's a new form, which is the one that I mentioned, and you just take this and customize it.
Yep, that was going to be my answer too. I've actually had the opportunity to get my hands on the new V12 DOM config login form, And really, it's arguably exactly the same as the old one with a new CSS on it, which is it looks a heck of a lot better than it used to.
If you just try to make it clear, I have, and brace yourself, I'm an admin, I've opened Domino Designer, and if you look at the forms, you see that this is the standard login form that has a few fields: username, password, redirect, and the button login, and this thing. So if you customize it, then this is the new login form for MFA that has more fields, but basically it's the same. That has this token is new. But if you take this form and customize it, then you can have your custom login form with your graphics and everything else, I assume, but don't change the name. It has to be called like this, because in the document, it has to be named like this. So this is what I would suggest to do. And then again, Graham is a much better developer than me. So if he has anything else to add, feel free.
Yeah, no, we're very much aligned there. I would say that the if you're comfortable modifying the old login form, you'll be comfortable modifying the new login form.
Right.
Okay, so we have another question, also on TOTP. Can some users have to use TOTP and the rest use the standard name password? Like
no.
before? No.
No. As of now, is a server-wide settings.
Okay.
So, yep.
I was going to just chime in as well. I have a question that's not in the screen here, but I saw in your presentation, Roberto, you had a screenshot specifically of the Domino access services and the ability to set that to use TOTP.
Yes.
Can you not enable TOTP for Domino access services yet have it enabled for end user login?
I've never tried, honestly.
Okay,
That's
so the reason I'm asking,
I need to test it and I can come back to you.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is that I've actually used Domino access services in a hands-off application mode, basically where DAS is serving data to a third-party application. So of course, enabling TOTP would break that application. So that's something that we should figure out and be able to share with people, that some of your applications could break if you turn on two-factor authentication.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you turn it on, you have multiple login screens.
I need to check.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll find out. We can put that in a follow-up notes for the webinar.
But as far as I know, now it's a server-wide setting. So once you enable TOTP, all your web users will have to use it. You can't say, Graham, yes, Roberto, no. As of now, I guess it's a request, and I don't know if and whether it will be fulfilled, but.
We've just had a comment from one of the people in the webinar that says we could always use multiple internet sites as an option. So thank you for that. Okay, so Eric added in a little tip that said, take a look at the install_domino.sh file and the corresponding README to understand what other steps are required to run a Domino server on Linux. The install script executes these steps as well. So that's a good tip.
Yep, I just make it the quick and dirty way. I didn't spend time in talking about all the options that are in the setup. Eric's suggestion is very good. If you want to do it yourself, I strongly recommend you to read the documentation and do it.
Okay, Serdar, we got a question for you. You had mentioned something about internal events that can be a trigger to tasklets. Could you provide more information on that?
Okay, a little bit history again. So first of all, I haven't looked into if there's any update with these internal events, let's say, because this was a historically problematic subject, because in the first version of OpenNTF version of DOTS included this EM event, let's say, extension manager event. If you remember this extension manager, these are native libraries written in C, compiled against that target operating system, and these are just the DLL files. And the first version, the first couple of versions of DOTS included these events. So basically, the idea is something happens in the NSF or in the Domino server, and that there are various events that can trigger such EM event propagation, like NSF creation, database create, database delete, database compact or updates, some kind of view updates, nodes creation, nodes deletion, etc., etc. So the idea was these kind of events can trigger these tasklets. However, IBM didn't need that functionality alone, and they removed this specific functionality from the Domino 9 version. And I remember Nathan and Uri spent a lot of time to improve this specific feature. I don't know which version HCL included into the product. As I said, I have not have experience with EM events, but there is an extended list of all EM events that are supported in the DOTS official documentation, which the PDF can be downloaded to see the link to that documentation. So that's it. Yeah. And the next question, I can explain the next question as well. Richard asked about if HCL supports DOTS or is it only the OpenNTF version again. The problem was, yeah, OpenNTF version was always there and it's still there. It's a little bit enhanced. There's also an enhanced version of DOTS, but it's not touched in any way in more than a couple of years. They didn't use OpenNTF version. The current DOTS implementation is based on the OpenNTF version, but they have closed the source, and that means it's going to be supported unless they say otherwise, and they didn't say otherwise. And I saw some support questions asked and replied in the support portal. So we can assume that right now DOTS is supported by HCL as its entire. So that's the probably that's so until they told us otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Serdar. I think we're running out of questions. I think we have one comment. And Roberto, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Nude says Scion TOTP allows you to define who has to use it.
I've never tried their application. Scion TOTP application is the one that I mentioned that work for version 11 and before. So probably it has some options that the default TOTP application in V12 doesn't have. And I'll take 1 second, sorry, one. There is another off-topic question, but I'll answer it the same. That says the Domino setup was very easy. Now it's more easy. Could HCL work on simplifying connection setup? Again, you should post these questions in the Slack channel, but the answer is yes, assuming that you know what Ansible is. You can set up connection using Ansible scripts, and that makes your life easier.
Yeah, and then actually that question, since it's for HCL, would best, or that request for an enhancement would best be posted to the AHA website that HCL has for future requests. So if you do have any comments about what HCL should do in the future, it's always best to use the AHA website that HCL has, and not our Slack channel, because that way the HCL product managers will review it. Okay, with that, I think, Graham, unless you have something else, we'll wrap up. We're right at.
I'm good.
Richard added another question, just for clarification. He asked, are extension manager events supported by HCL or OpenNTF? As I said, OpenNTF has no business on the current code base right now, with coming with Domino 12. So yeah, the extension manager DLL delivered with the product right now. So it's also in the documentation, and it's probably supported right now. They didn't tell anything against it. So that's why there's the complication. Previously, it wasn't supported. I think in the community there wasn't anyone actually using it in their projects. But right now it seems like it's supported as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Serdar. All right, and I'd like to thank Roberto and Serdar for their work today in pulling together the presentations and so sharing this information for everyone. And thanks to Graham and Jesse for helping out pull these webinars off. So I hope everyone's rest of their day or evening goes good, and we'll see you everybody next month for our November webinar. Watch the OpenNTF website for the topic when that is announced. Thanks so much.